Meadowcraft workshop, so I suppose we could call this the Meadowcraft office.
Well, I hope you can see okay. I'm not making a tremendous close-up style video, as to be quite honest, I'm sure I'm going over familiar ground to most of you. What I do use is some diamond stones set in steel, which gives you a very flat and even surface. They're made by DMT. They're not cheap, but there are other stones out there which will probably do maybe as good a job, although I do like the DMT stones, and I think the expense is actually worth it for consistency. I've got a coarse, which is really for repairing damage to a blade where you've chipped it, resetting a tip or an angle, and is more for really damaged blades, and so gets used infrequently, I'll say. But it's also very useful for things like axes and other implements that you need to sharpen. The next one I use is an extra fine, and I'm really not sure of the grits. Because diamond stones are described in mesh sizes, and I suppose this would be a fine, but medium fine, if you understand what I'm saying, and is really the first step in the major of sharpening. The next one I use is an extra fine, and this is probably as near to anything as the coarse honing I would have described it. Once I've gone through these two, in 99% of the cases, I then move on to the traditional leather strops. This one is a kangaroo skin. I thought I'd just try it. It is very, very good, I have to say. But this is just normal leather with blue compound or white compound cutting wax that I just rub on it periodically, and that I use for polishing. For the really small, tiny knives, then I fall back on my flex cut little sharpener, which I use for micro chisels and things like that. So it's a pretty standard progression from the fine to set an edge. Here's a typical roughing knife that I use when I'm carving, and I use a little water. You can use just a smidge of washing up liquid into the stone to keep it clean, but I find water is fine. I just smear it around a bit, and then I lay the blade on the stone, set the angle, and then gently stroke on a regular basis away from myself, and then turn it over, raise it slightly, and pull it back. Now, this does depend on muscle memory, in a sense that you're constantly setting the edge or the tip of the apex at the desired angle. And I like to use 20 degrees on my blades, 20, thereabouts. We are talking quite small bevels. So I count the strokes. I go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then turn it over. Now this knife is pretty sharp. It only needs a light touch up. So I just reset the angle and pull back the same stroke length. Just dry the blade off slightly. Have a look along the edge. Now if I was resetting this blade, you know, if I'd either taken it off the course or I really did want to sharpen rather than just polish it up, I would keep stroking initially until I had a burr. Now a burr is just a fine little wire that it leans away from the angle. So if I was doing it that way, I would expect to feel the burr with my fingernail tip or just stroking my finger against it, and you'll suddenly find that you've got a little tiny wire edge, a little roughness along this blade, and you then turn it over and you do it again, and you find that the burr comes back up onto this side, and you turn it over, and eventually that burr gets finer and finer. I'll just dry that off. Then I would move up to my finest stone, which is the extra fine. A little water, exactly the same, and I would then stroke it backwards and forwards and look to see that I've got a burr, and when I have, I would then count the strokes very carefully so it's even on both sides. And then I would move on to my strop after having dried my blade, and then stroking. I start off on a coarse side. Now for me the coarse side is the nap side, this side of the leather, which over the years has got plenty of paste in it, and you'll know that it's worked because you'll see it darkens slightly, and it's the same process of counting the strokes. And this 99% of the time will polish up the edge and take off the burr. The majority of times when I'm carving, I only use a strop, and I tend to work on the principle of 20 minutes to half an hour of carving, and you soon sense that the blade isn't quite as clean, and it doesn't cut just smoothly and nicely. This is a little bit of a white pine, and it's rather hard, but as you can see, this blade is already sharp and is certainly giving me the type of cut that I need with little effort. And I find that the majority of times just stropping after use, as I say, for about half an hour, brings the edge back to the degree of sharpness that I need. There are videos out there that talk about microns and getting a hyper polished edge, taking it one step further. And I do have some. This is called lapping tape, and it comes in lots of different microns, 30, then the next one's 12, 9, 3, I mark it on the back so I can remember, 2 and 1, and it's just a question of the same sort of action, but just laying the blade gently at the angle, and this will produce a really fine polished edge. I'm not going to bore you with doing it all the way through, but as we know, this knife is very sharp, and I have found that there are occasions, particularly with the really finer tiny knives that I use, this produces, if you like, a next grade up of sharpness. But it does have a little drawback, which you have to bear in mind, that when you're getting to this level of clean edge around the apex of the blade, you are talking about minute little pieces of metal. And to be frank, when you're getting to this degree of sharpness, it's, even with the best of steel, it's not going to last as long as, shall we say, just coming straight off a strop. Now, the reason for that is obviously when you're getting down to these really small levels, you're into a whole different ball game, and it isn't going to be as resilient. It's not going to last as long, although it is an absolute joy when you get a really polished edge. As you can see, it just curls back, and this is really hard wood, and it leaves on the wood a polished effect. So you do know that you've got a very sharp blade, but as I've already said, for the majority of the time you're carving, that, unless you're using it as a detail knife, where you're looking to bring out, say, some wood across the grain using the tip, that's very useful to get the tip as clean and as sharp as you need to leave, say, a detail. So that's it. I don't talk too much about how I stroke, and I just do it instinctively. And for me, it's been fine. But what I have noticed is that more and more, when I'm trying to keep a consistent angle, the tremor that is coming into my hands has meant some disasters, and I suddenly see when I'm looking along my edge that it's become quite wavy, and that means then that when you're looking to stroke some wood off, it can suddenly catch, and you think, why? And when I look at the blade, I see that I haven't really achieved the consistency that I wanted. So I hope that's just a reminder and a quick view at the way I sharpen knives 90% of the time. Looking at some other methods, I have mounted on the back of these stones, because they are super flat. I have put on here some wet and dry, and this is, I think, 20,000 grit, and it's a little bit like looking at a lower level of lapping, and I use that more for my knives, like hunting knives and things like that, where I've set the bevel and I'm looking then to get the cutting edge as polished as I can. And I use these on my course. That's 1200 and that's 20. You can mount it on wood. This is one like a strop, and this I marked to remind me that's 1500 and that's 2000, and that's really achieving the same as that. So I hope that, as a sort of general reminder, is useful. Now what I'd like to do is have a look at it was a gift, a very kind gift from my family, when I was looking into ways that I may be able to overcome some of the problems I'm finding with setting an angle